I found a box of my mother's love letters, but they weren't for my father. What I discovered next changed everything. After my mother passed away, I was left with a house full of memories, photographs, and the scent of her perfume lingering in the air like a whisper. Everything about that house felt like her presence, quiet and persistent, until I found the box. It was tucked away in the corner of the attic, dusty and forgotten, tied with a faded ribbon, and I didn't know why I was drawn to it, but something told me I needed to open it. Inside, I found stacks of letters, neatly tied in bundles, each one written in her delicate, flowing handwriting. My heart pounded as I picked one up, expecting perhaps correspondence with old friends or family. But as I unfolded the first letter, the words hit me like a wave. It wasn't addressed to my father, not even once. "Dearest," the letter began, and I froze, a chill running down my spine. My mother's voice was unmistakable, gentle, intimate, full of longing I had never heard directed at anyone but my father. The words spoke of moments she had cherished, of secret dreams, of love that had existed beyond what I had ever known. I read on, heart pounding, cheeks burning. The letters spoke of promises, of waiting, of devotion that had endured time, distance, and hardship, and I couldn't help but wonder, who was this man? I picked up the next letter, then the next, and with each one, a picture formed, a story I had never imagined. My mother had loved someone else, someone who wasn't my father, someone whose name was repeated through the letters like a sacred mantra. I felt a strange mix of shock, betrayal, and curiosity. My mind raced. Who was this man? How had she loved him and still loved my father? How had she carried this secret all these years? As I read, I realized something else. The letters weren't just about love, they were about promises. Promises kept in silence, promises that had shaped her life, her choices, her happiness, and even mine in ways I couldn't yet understand. The way she described him, the way she wrote about waiting, about remembering moments shared decades ago, I felt a connection forming, even though I didn't know him yet. I spent the rest of the afternoon sifting through the box, my hands trembling, my heart aching and swelling all at once. Each letter was a window into a side of my mother I'd never seen, a love I'd never known existed, and a mystery that demanded to be solved. Then, as the sun began to dip behind the trees outside, casting a golden glow across the attic, I paused on one letter and froze. A name was written at the end, a name I knew, a name that belonged to someone in my life now. My breath caught. Could it be? Could the man my mother had loved all those years, the man she had written about with such devotion, be someone I had known all along? My hand shook as I held the letter close, heart pounding in a way I hadn't felt since I first realized the weight of her secret. Everything I thought I knew about love, about my mother, about family, was about to change. Would you read letters written to someone else if they revealed a hidden love story? The days after discovering the letters were a whirlwind of questions I couldn't stop asking myself. I kept returning to that attic, sitting on the cold wooden floor with the box of letters spread around me like a puzzle I was desperate to solve. Each one added another piece to the story, painting a picture of a love I had never imagined, a devotion I had never expected, and a promise that seemed to stretch across decades. The more I read, the more I realized that this wasn't just a fleeting romance. My mother had loved this man deeply, in ways that went beyond what I had ever seen in her with my father. She wrote about stolen moments in cafes, walks in the rain, quiet conversations that lasted until dawn, letters she never sent but kept tucked away as a testament to something sacred. And woven through all of it was a promise, a vow to wait, to remain devoted, to honor a bond that neither time nor circumstance could break. But as the letters revealed her heart, they also revealed fragments of the man behind the words. His name appeared over and over, familiar yet strange, like a whisper I almost recognized. I thought of everyone in my life now, and my stomach twisted when I realized there was one person it could be. Could it really be him? The man she had loved and waited for all these years? Could he truly be someone I knew? Someone who had been in my life without me ever realizing the depth of his story? My mind raced through faces, conversations, memories I'd shared with friends, family, even acquaintances. And then it hit me. There was one man whose presence always felt steady, comforting, someone who had been quietly loyal and patient in ways I hadn't understood until now. My heart leapt and sank at the same time. Could he be the one? The man who had kept a decades-long promise to my mother, whose love had endured silently all these years? I couldn't stop thinking about the implications. If it was him, if he had truly honored a vow of love across time, how would he react when he knew I had found her letters? And what did it mean for me? For the way I understood love, loyalty, and family? Everything I believed about my mother, about my family, about love itself, was shifting beneath my feet. I spent that evening staring at the letters, reading the words over and over, letting her voice wash over me. I could almost hear her laughter, feel her longing, sense the quiet strength she carried in keeping this secret safe. And then I realized this story wasn't just about her. It was about the man she had loved, about the promises people make and keep, about the invisible threads that connect hearts across time. My hands trembled as I picked up one letter, tracing the name she had written so delicately at the bottom. I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were falling into place. I knew who he was, and I knew that soon I would have to face him, to confront a love story that had been decades in the making, and to see how one promise could change everything I thought I knew about love. Would you confront someone about a love story you just discovered in your family? I couldn't sleep that night. The letters lay sprawled across my bed, their words whispering through my mind, and I kept going over the name, over his face, over every memory I had of him, trying to see the connection, trying to believe what my heart was telling me. It was him. It had to be. The man my mother had loved all these years, the man who had kept her secret and honored a promise I'd never imagined, was someone I knew, someone I had seen countless times, someone who had quietly been a part of my life without me ever realizing it. The thought made my chest tighten. How had I never noticed? How had he remained so steadfast, so loyal, so quiet? Every gesture, every word, every glance suddenly took on a new meaning. The kindness he had always shown, the small acts of thoughtfulness, the way he seemed to understand things without explanation. It all fit. And yet, the reality was overwhelming. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a story that had begun decades before I was even born. The next day, I saw him at the cafe where my mother had often written in her letters about their secret meetings. My heart pounded in my chest. He looked the same, just slightly older, but with the same warmth, the same quiet presence I'd always admired. I wanted to run to him, to confront him, to demand answers, but something held me back. I couldn't just barge into a story that had been decades in the making. I had to be careful. I had to honor the love and devotion that had endured in silence for so long. Instead, I watched him from across the room. He sipped his coffee, flipping through a notebook with the same gentle focus my mother had described in her letters. And for a moment, I imagined what it must have been like all those years ago, the two of them together, sharing stolen moments, promises whispered in the dark, and a love that had survived time, distance, and secrecy. My chest ached with longing, with awe, with the weight of understanding a story I hadn't been part of until now. Finally, gathering every ounce of courage, I approached him. My hands trembled, my voice barely above a whisper. I found my mother's letters. He looked up, eyes widening in recognition, and for a moment, the world felt suspended. I saw a flicker of fear, yes, but also something deeper, a lifetime of devotion, a promise kept, and a quiet love that had endured through decades of silence. I didn't know how to tell you, he said finally, voice steady but filled with emotion. I promised her I would wait. I promised I would honor her love. And I always have. The words struck me like lightning. Every piece fell into place. Every letter, every secret, every quiet act of devotion was real, and it had been hidden in plain sight all these years. My mother's love was alive, preserved in letters and in a promise that had survived time itself. And now, standing in front of him, I understood what it truly meant to honor love, to keep a promise, and to witness devotion that transcended everything. Would you confront someone if you discovered they were part of a secret love story from your family? Sitting across from him in the quiet cafe, I felt like I was witnessing history, a love story that had unfolded long before I was born, a devotion that had remained hidden in the shadows, patiently waiting for its moment to be revealed. His eyes, calm yet intense, met mine, and I could feel the weight of decades pressing in between us. Each letter I had read now had a face, a voice, a presence, and I realized that love, the kind my mother had written about, wasn't just words on paper. It was alive, enduring, and astonishingly real. He began to speak, slowly, as if choosing each word with care. When your mother and I met, it was immediate. There was a connection that neither of us could ignore, but circumstances, life, it made our love impossible in the way we wanted. I promised her I would wait, that I would honor what we had, and I never stopped. Every year, every decision, I kept that promise quietly so she could live her life fully, without worry, without burden. I listened, stunned. The realization hit me like a physical force. My mother's love had not faded, and his devotion had been unwavering. All those small gestures, the letters tucked away in secret, the longing expressed in every word, it had been a bond stronger than time, stronger than distance, stronger than even life itself. But why keep it hidden? I asked, voice barely above a whisper, heart racing. Why not tell anyone? He smiled faintly, a mixture of sadness and pride. Because love like that, it's sacred. It's not about recognition or glory. It's about honoring the promise, keeping her happiness and memory intact, and trusting that what we shared would endure, even unseen. That was the vow I made to her, and I kept it because love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and eternal. Tears blurred my vision. I had read the letters thinking I would uncover secrets, maybe betrayal, maybe heartbreak, but instead I found devotion, integrity, and a love story more profound than I had ever imagined. My mother had loved fiercely, and he had loved just as fiercely across decades, across every challenge life threw at them. And now, finally I understood. Every letter, every word, every hidden confession had been a testament to a promise kept, a legacy of love that had survived time. I reached out, placing my hand over his, a silent acknowledgement of the story, the devotion, the incredible magnitude of what I was witnessing. I understand now, I whispered. I see the love. I see the promise. And I think it's the most beautiful thing I've ever known. He nodded, eyes glistening, and for the first time, the weight between us lifted slightly, replaced by a quiet, almost sacred peace. The letters, the decades, the secrecy, it was all worth it. Love, I realized, didn't always need to be public to be powerful. Sometimes love endured because it was kept, cherished, and honored in the quietest, most profound ways possible. Would you honor a love story if it meant keeping it secret for decades? It took me days to process everything he had told me. I kept going back to the letters, rereading them, letting my mother's words wash over me again and again. Each letter was a piece of her heart, a window into a love so profound and patient that it changed the way I understood everything about devotion, sacrifice, and courage. She had loved with intensity, but she had also loved wisely, protecting her own happiness while nurturing a connection that spanned decades. And he had honored that love in ways I could scarcely believe. I realized then that love wasn't just about grand gestures or public declarations. It wasn't about instant gratification or fleeting moments of passion. True love, the kind my mother had experienced, was quiet, steadfast, and enduring. It was the kind of love that waited, that persevered, that honored promises even when no one else could witness them. And somehow, in a way I couldn't yet fully explain, it had shaped me too. The way I viewed relationships, the way I understood loyalty, the way I believed in the possibility of enduring devotion. I met him again at the same cafe where we had shared our first conversation. This time, there was no hesitation between us, no trembling uncertainty. We talked about the past, about my mother, about the life she had lived and the choices she had made, and for the first time, I felt like I was part of her story, not just an observer. Every word, every glance, every shared memory of her painted a picture of a woman who had loved fiercely and a man who had loved just as fiercely in return. I think I understand now, I said, voice soft, almost reverent. I understand why she wrote these letters, why she kept this love hidden, and why you kept your promise all these years. It's beautiful. It's the most incredible thing I've ever known. He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. She loved fully, and I loved fully. And now you know it too. That's all I ever wanted, for her love to be understood, and for the promise we made to be honored, even after everything. In that moment, I felt a deep connection, not just to him or my mother, but to the idea of love itself, a love that could endure decades, survive silence, and remain unshakable no matter what life threw in its path. I understood the weight of promises, the courage it takes to love selflessly, and the quiet power of devotion that is unwavering and eternal. As I left the cafe that evening, letters tucked carefully in my bag, I felt a sense of peace, of closure, and of awe. I had discovered a love story that transcended time, a story of promises kept, and a lesson in love that would stay with me forever. My mother's heart, her words, her devotion, they were no longer a mystery. They were a gift, a guide, and a reminder that true love doesn't fade, doesn't waver, and sometimes it waits patiently for the world to understand it. Have you ever realized the true depth of someone else's love long after it began? After that evening at the cafe, life didn't suddenly feel lighter, but it felt different, deeper, fuller, somehow infused with a new understanding of love. I kept the letters close, reading them quietly when the house was empty, letting my mother's voice guide me. Each word reminded me that love wasn't always obvious, wasn't always easy, and wasn't always loud. Sometimes the most powerful love was patient, enduring, and invisible to the world. The kind that waited decades, survived silence, and honored promises even when no one else could witness them. I began to notice small things in my own life differently. I saw how people around me expressed devotion quietly, in gestures and patience, in consistent care rather than grand proclamations. I realized that love could be expressed in silence, that it could survive obstacles, that it could grow stronger when it was nurtured carefully, even secretly. My mother's letters weren't just a story of the past, they were a lesson, a blueprint, a quiet reminder that love, when true, is timeless. One afternoon, I returned to the cafe, the same one where I had first confronted him, and found him waiting by the window. He greeted me with the same calm warmth that had always felt familiar, as if decades of devotion had somehow created a protective space around him that made everyone feel safe. We talked quietly, gently about my mother, about the memories, and about how love had quietly endured without anyone noticing. There was no awkwardness, no tension, only the profound understanding that comes from witnessing something extraordinary. I never imagined anyone else would read these letters, he said softly, eyes flicking to the stack I had brought with me. But now that you have, it feels right. It feels like her love, our love, has reached the next generation. You understand her, you understand me, and somehow you understand what it means to keep a promise. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. I do, and I think I'll carry it with me, always. Not just as a story, but as a reminder that love is patient, and devotion matters, and sometimes the quietest acts are the most meaningful. As the afternoon light filtered through the windows, painting the cafe in soft golden hues, I felt a sense of closure, not because the story was over, but because I understood it fully. My mother's heart had spoken to me through these letters, and now I had the honor of witnessing her love, her courage, and the extraordinary promise that had endured all these years. Leaving the cafe that day, letters carefully returned to the box, I realized that some stories, some promises, and some love are too powerful to be confined to a single lifetime. They ripple outward, touching others, inspiring, guiding, and teaching in ways we never expect. My mother's love had changed me, and now I carried it forward, quietly, patiently, forever. Have you ever discovered a story that changed the way you see love? Days turned into weeks, and the letters remained with me, a quiet presence in my life, a gentle reminder of the story I'd uncovered. Every morning, I would hold them for a moment, tracing my mother's handwriting with my fingers, imagining her voice speaking the words she had written so carefully, so deliberately. The more I reflected, the more I realized how profoundly her story had changed the way I saw love. Not just her love, not just the man who had kept his promise, but the very idea of devotion, patience, and the courage it took to love quietly and fully. I began noticing my own relationships differently. Friends, family, even fleeting interactions seemed richer, more layered. I thought about the small gestures of care and attention I had overlooked before, the promises that went unsaid but were lived every day. Love wasn't only in grand gestures or dramatic moments, it was in consistency, patience, and faithfulness. My mother's letters had shown me that devotion could exist beyond appearances, beyond recognition, and beyond time itself. One evening, I met him again, the man who had kept my mother's love alive. This time, our conversation drifted from her story to my life, and I felt myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. I think I understand now why she trusted you, I said quietly. Because love like yours, it isn't just about emotion. It's about integrity, commitment, and honor, and that's something I want to carry forward in my own life. He smiled, a faint glimmer of pride in his eyes. She trusted because she knew that promises mattered, and you carry that understanding now. That's how love endures. That's how it shapes generations quietly, invisibly, but powerfully. As we sat in the cafe, sunlight streaming through the windows, I felt a connection not only to him and my mother, but also to the larger idea of love itself. I realized that our actions, our devotion, our commitment to those we care about, even if unnoticed, had the power to ripple through time. The letters weren't just a story. They were a living lesson, a blueprint for the kind of love that endures, even when circumstances make it difficult, even when recognition is absent, and even when the world doesn't know it exists. That night at home, I carefully placed the letters back in the box, thinking about what they meant for me. My mother's love was no longer a secret, it was a guide, and I understood that life would always present challenges, that love would never be perfect, but that promises kept, devotion nurtured, and patience honored could create a love story that transcends time, that survives hardships, and that teaches the next generation how to love fully and wisely. For the first time, I felt ready to carry that understanding into my own life, into my own relationships, and into my heart, forever inspired by the extraordinary love my mother had lived and the promise he had kept. How did the small, quiet acts of love in your life shape your relationships? Weeks passed, and I began to see my mother not just as my parent, but as a woman with a life, a heart, and a love story that had existed long before I arrived. The letters had opened a window into her soul, showing me the courage it took to love, the wisdom it took to wait, and the strength it took to honor a promise that no one else might ever understand. I realized that her life had been full, rich with emotion and devotion, and that the legacy of her love was now mine to carry forward. Every morning, I would pause and think about the lessons I'd learned. Love wasn't fleeting. It wasn't about grand displays or public approval. It was about consistency, trust, patience, and integrity. I noticed the small acts around me, friends who never missed a birthday, family members who quietly supported each other, strangers who showed kindness without expectation, and I began to see the hidden threads of devotion weaving through everyday life. My mother's letters had shown me that even unseen love mattered, and that understanding this truth could transform how I lived and loved. One day I met him, the man who had kept her love alive, for lunch at a small, quiet restaurant. We shared stories, laughed softly, and remembered moments from the past that only the letters had preserved. He told me more about how he had watched over my mother from afar, honoring her heart and keeping her happiness at the center of his own life. I realized that the promise he had kept wasn't just about her. It was about demonstrating the kind of devotion that shapes lives, inspires others, and leaves a legacy that cannot be erased. I sometimes wonder if she knew how much her letters would mean to you one day, he said, his voice gentle. She always believed that love mattered, even if it went unseen. And now you understand that. You've inherited her wisdom, her understanding, and her capacity to see devotion for what it truly is. Tears came to my eyes. I had thought I was reading letters to uncover a secret, but instead, I had discovered a gift, the gift of understanding love in its truest form. I understood the beauty of patience, the power of promises, and the courage it took to love fully, even in silence. And I knew that carrying this understanding forward in my life and in my own relationships would be my way of honoring both my mother and the man who had kept his vow. As I walked home that evening, letters safely tucked away, I felt a quiet sense of purpose. Love, I realized, was never wasted. It could endure, inspire, and transform. And sometimes it had to be quietly nurtured, patiently held, and faithfully honored before the world could ever see its depth. My mother had lived that truth, and now so could I. Have you ever discovered a story that changed how you view love in your life? It was a quiet evening when I finally understood the full weight of what I had discovered. Sitting by my bedroom window, the box of letters beside me, I let the memories of my mother's words wash over me one last time. Each letter had been a piece of her heart, a testament to the love she had lived, and now I could see it as a whole, a tapestry woven with patience, courage, and devotion that had endured across decades. I thought about the man who had kept her love alive, the one who had honored every promise, every word, every unspoken vow. His life had been shaped by that devotion, guided by the quiet strength of a commitment that refused to fade. And in seeing him, in hearing his words, I realized that love could take forms beyond what we imagine, beyond what society defines. Love could survive silence, distance, and even absence, and still remain powerful, transformative, and eternal. I decided to reach out to him once more. This time, it wasn't about the letters or the story. It was about connection, understanding, and gratitude. I wanted him to know that I saw the full picture, that I appreciated the life he had lived in honor of my mother, and that I was carrying her legacy forward in my own heart. When I met him at the park, the air was golden with late afternoon sunlight. He smiled when he saw me, a warmth that spoke of years of devotion and quiet resilience. "You've read them all," he said softly, "and now you understand." "I do," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I understand her love, your devotion, and the courage it took for both of you. I understand what it means to keep a promise, and I promise to honor it in my own way." He looked at me with a mix of surprise and gratitude, and for a moment we shared a silence that held the weight of decades. I felt the presence of my mother in that quiet space, her voice lingering in the breeze, her heart whispering through every word she had written. I realized that her love had never been lost. It had only been waiting for me to see it, to understand it, and to carry it forward. As I walked home that evening, I held the letters close, knowing that they were no longer just memories or secrets. They were a guide, a gift, and a reminder of the extraordinary power of love, the kind that waits patiently, endures silently, and transforms lives long after the first word is written. And in that understanding, I felt complete, connected not only to my mother and the man who had honored her love, but also to the very essence of what it means to love fully and without reservation. How do you think a story like this could change the way you view love in your own life? The days that followed were quiet but full of reflection. I found myself thinking constantly about my mother, about the man who had kept her love alive, and about the lessons embedded in those letters. They were more than words on paper. They were a map of devotion, a guide to understanding the depth of love that could survive time, distance, and silence. I felt honored to be the one to carry that legacy, to witness the story unfold, and to understand the extraordinary patience and courage it had taken to honor a promise for decades. I returned to the attic one last time and carefully placed the letters back in their box. I ran my fingers over the faded ribbons, over the delicate handwriting, and I whispered a quiet thank you. Not just to my mother, but to the man who had lived a life shaped by loyalty and love, to the story that had taught me more about devotion than any book or lesson ever could. I understood now that love wasn't measured in grand gestures or public declarations. It was measured in the small acts that went unnoticed, in promises kept without recognition, and in the quiet patience that endured long after the world had forgotten. When I met him again, it was with a sense of calm and gratitude. We didn't need to speak at length. Our shared understanding, our respect for the story, and the connection we both felt to my mother's love were enough. I realized that their love, their promise, and their devotion had become a part of me. It had reshaped the way I thought about relationships, commitment, and the power of love that waits. Walking home that evening, the sunlight warm on my face, I thought about the impact of the letters on my life. I thought about the lessons I would carry forward, to love patiently, to honor promises, and to recognize that sometimes the most profound love exists quietly without recognition, yet its effects are felt for a lifetime. My mother's story had become my guide, her devotion a standard I now aspired to, and the promise he had kept a lesson in the enduring power of true love. As the stars began to appear, I sat by my window, letters close at hand, and felt a deep sense of peace. The story was complete, yet its echoes would last forever. I understood now that love, when true, does not fade, it does not falter, and it does not disappear. It waits, it endures, and it transforms. And I knew that I would carry this understanding into every relationship, every moment of care, and every promise I ever made. In that quiet, reflective space, I smiled, knowing that my mother's love, the man's devotion, and the letters that revealed them would forever remain a part of me, a testament to the extraordinary power of love that waits patiently, silently, and faithfully, and lasts forever. How would discovering a story like this change the way you approach love in your life?